false? This exists in a female up until puberty. False. This only exists in a female when? Prior to birth. Before she's even born, she's going to replicate all that DNA. So if this is an oogonium, what is this specific cell? Spermatogonium. So again, look at whether we're talking about the male or the female, because otherwise it's both going to be 2N. Soon as you have that spermatogonium, you replicate the DNA, it becomes a primary spermatocyte. Very similar. This is a primary oocyte. What's the chromosomal content?
2NR.
2NR. Identify the phase at the tip of the pointer. Metaphase 1. Identify the main event that occurs during this phase.
Tetrads line up.
Homologous chromosomes, or tetrads, align along the metaphase plate. You know the metaphase plate is not in the center of that cell. Why is that important to know? It's an unequal cytoplasmic division, so that you form a polar body as well. So in the female, identify the phase here. Anaphase 1. What specific structures are separated?
Sister chromatids.
Ooh, what specific structures are separated? Homologous chromosomes, because in anaphase 2, what specific structures are separated? Sister chromatids. Now this cytoplasmic division is not yet complete. This is still one cell. Identify the cell at the tip of the pointer.
Primary spermatocyte.
This is a secondary oocyte. Chromosomal content? NR. This is a first polar body divided so that you have two. Normally I wouldn't ask those specifically, but you do want to know this cell. It exists for a fraction of time. This is a ovum. Chromosomal content? N. Now at this time you would also have a male pronucleus in there, but we don't consider that part of the chromosomal content until the pronuclei fuse. What is this cell? Chromosomal content? 2N. Nice job. And this cell is a spermatozoa. Identify the region, or spermatozoan. Identify the region at the tip of the pointer. Head. Two organelles found in the head are called the blank and the blank. Acrosome and nucleus, or acrosomal kappa nucleus. Nice job. The mid-piece contains what main organelle? Mitochondria. Those mitochondria use two main sources for fuel to make ATP. What are the two main sources of fuel for the mitochondria? Fructose and citric acid. Citric acid is produced by what structure in the male? Prostate gland. Fructose is produced by what structure in the male? Seminal vesicles. This is a spermatozoon. This is a spermatid. The process by which a spermatid becomes a spermatozoon is called what?
Spermiogenesis.
Spermiogenesis. Spermiogenesis. Spermatogenesis is this entire process of making the sperm. Spermiation is where the sperm let go of the Sertoli cells and leave their home, if you will, for the tubular lumen. What is this cell at the tip of the pointer? This is called a spermatogonium. This is showing the male in terms of the grasshopper. This is the grasshopper model. Again, you don't need to know all 5 of these phases. Typically, I'll point to this one, identify the specific phase. Prophase 1, identify the cell. Primary spermatocyte. Chromosomal content? 2NR. Identify 2 events that are occurring here. Sounds good. You can say tetrad formation, synapsis, crossing over. All of those are great. What's the function of crossing over? Increase genetic diversification so that you produce gametes of multiple genetic makeups. Identify the specific phase. Metaphase 1, again, homologous chromosomes are being separated. Identify this yellow formation.
Spindle fiber.
Mitotic spindle, identify the organelle, indicated by this black dot. Centrosome, identify this mid piece. Centromere, nice job. If cytokinesis is complete, so these are two separate cells, identify the phase at the tip of the pointer. This is called prophase 2. Now, if you were arguing that cytokinesis is not quite complete, it would be telophase 1. They look almost identical, but to me, and when you look at the model, you'll see it has two membranes there, so it's two separate cells. Identify the phase of the cell. Metaphase 2, what structures are being separated? Sister chromatids. Don't forget, again, spermatid versus spermatozoan. You can see your acrosome and nucleus. Identify one main substance found within here. Hyaluronidase. What was another substance fast for two? Protease. Nice job. So proteolytic enzymes, or you could even say a proteolytic enzyme, something that's going to break down those coverings of the ovulated structure. Here do you know the nucleus? Looks good. Identify the specific structure. Second polar body, chromosomal content. N, this is chromosomal content NR, this must be the first polar body, and the cell we know is the, oh, I thought we knew it, maybe not. What's this cell? This is called an ovum. Ovum, chromosomal content, N. So when you check out that ovum, or eventually prior to becoming the ovum, you're gonna see this model, kind of like so. Let's make sure we know these cells. So identify the cell at the tip of the pointer. Primary oocyte, chromosomal content. 2NR. This entire structure is called a primordial follicle. True or false? A female will have about 40,000 of these in her ovary at puberty. That is true. About 40,000. So she's born with more. She's born with like 200,000 or something. But they're undergoing a process of, you can think of it as pruning. But what do we call it when these start to die? Atresia. They're always undergoing atresia. So a female has a limited reproductive years, or limited time of her reproductive years. What's interesting is we're finding that the time for a female's reproductive years are decreasing. So now that we kind of delay parenthood, we're also seeing that the reproductive years are decreasing. That puts females in a very fine window of opportunity that they can even have children. When does this primordial follicle first start to get influences of FSH? At what point in a female's lifespan? At puberty. She's going to start again at GnRH, kind of at night, goes a little bit higher. She's going to start producing her FSH. FSH, stimulates the follicles to grow. Sounds good. This would be producing what structure? Primary follicle. What's this structure? Secondary follicle. What's this structure? Secondary follicle. Nice job. What's the cell inside? Primary oocyte. Even in a Graafian follicle, it's still a primary oocyte. And you think, oh yeah, how approximately, and it's not the same in every female, but approximately, how many days does it take to grow a Graafian follicle? About 14 days. Some females are faster, some are slower, but typically at day 14, this Graafian follicle is as big as it will get. As the number of granulosa cells increase, they increase their production of a hormone called estrogen. Estrogen in high concentrations has a positive feedback loop to stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to produce what? Luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone has a couple of things that it does. Number one, it will cause ovulation simultaneous with completion of meiosis 1. completion of meiosis 1 to get to our secondary oocyte. That LH surge also causes the follicular cells to transform into luteal cells so we can get to that luteal phase. So this cell is now a secondary oocyte, chromosomal content, and R. Of course, this is representing the first polar body we see is zona pellucida and corona radiata. We already mentioned the sperm. When the sperm membrane meets contact with the oolemma, what do we call that event? Syncytium. What do we call this event here? Fusion of the pronuclei, or at least it's about to occur. Technically, what's the name of the cell up here? Secondary oocyte. Technically, what's the name of the cell here? Ovum. Technically, what's the name of the cell here? Zygote. Do you see how they're all different? So here there's only one polar body, a first polar body, hence it's a secondary oocyte, but you can see how it's starting to complete that second meiotic division to give us our second polar body. The pronuclei have not quite fused yet, hence this is still an ovum, but as soon as they fuse, we call that a zygote. Just for good measure, we already know two-cell stage, the morula and the blastocyst, but let's get some specifics. What's the name of this cell? Blastomere, blastomere. What's the name of this region or structure? Inner cell mass, of course, becomes the embryo. What's this outer specific layer?
Trophoblast.
Trophoblast becomes the chorion and placenta. And what's this inner region called? Blastocyst cavity, which becomes the yolk sac. What were two main functions of the yolk sac? Source of blood cells and provides nourishment, but only for the first 2 to 3 weeks, and then blood cells for the 3 to 6 weeks. If we were to look at this female reproductive anatomy, we see some cool structures. Let's start over here. Identify the specific structure in yellow.
Ovary.
That's an ovary. Identify this structure in yellow. Ovarian ligament. Identify the structure in pink. Uterine tube. Identify the specific region. Isthmus. Identify the specific region. Infundibulum. Identify the specific region. Fimbriae. Don't forget the ampulla. The ampulla is kind of special because this is the site of if fertilization is going to occur, absolutely. Identify this specific attachment and the general structure it's a part of. Mesometrium of the broad ligament, nice job. We don't see a great view of the mesovarium here, but you can see some of the mesosalpinge, so it's holding that uterine tube in place. Just for good measure, yeah, I think we can do this. Identify the general layer. That might be tough. I think I only mentioned it in lecture. Parametrium. Parametrium, well, let's do these layers because I know we did these in lab and lecture. Identify the general layer. Myometrium. The myometrium contracts in response to two main stimuli, which would be the prostaglandins and oxytocin. Of course, relaxin inhibits those contractions. Interesting. Interesting. So then you start thinking about this female, and just to think about those myometrial contractions, during her last trimester, some females might be feeling a little uncomfortable, and they may think, is there a faster way to maybe start these uterine contractions? And some people think, well, let's think, the uterine contractions are going to be as soon as that placenta is big enough, it produces enough estrogen to increase prostaglandins. Well, let's say she's kind of savvy and says, oh, I know another way to get prostaglandins into my uterus. How can she get prostaglandins into your uterus? Say, hey, male partner of mine, can you introduce some prostaglandins to help me start to initiate contractions? And that's what some females do is, as they're approaching that last trimester, if they want to facilitate, and it's only gonna help minorly, but facilitate an earlier delivery, she can introduce prostaglandins via her male partner if so desired. So then you think about how the sperm or semen is going to be introduced into the female. She might have a connective tissue covering here called the hymen only prior to intercourse. And then of course we see this passageway called the vagina. It really serves three main roles. Number one would be the Oh, receives male gametes, absolutely. Delivers the baby and allows menstrual flow to come out, or menstruation. We already know it's NKSSET here. What's this general layer here? That's the muscularis. Muscularis is mostly what type of tissue? This is smooth muscle. So if you're thinking about controlling the vaginal orifice, that's not the muscularis here. That's gonna be this muscle, which is part of, this round muscle. What did we call that again? Urogenital diaphragm for this exam, but yes, on previous exams, we were just calling it levator ani. This urogenital diaphragm, oh yes, that's what you can contract for your Kegel exercises. You can see how it's close to that external anal sphincter, but it's also gonna tighten that vaginal orifice, and then here's that external urethral sphincter as well. We look up here, identify the specific region. That's the cervix. Identify the opening. External os. Internal os is up here. Of course, this is the cervical canal. What hormone causes a female to produce a very thin, watery-like cervical mucus? Estrogen. Is that the type that sperm can swim through, or not so much?
Yes.
That's what sperm can swim through. So during her latter follicular phase, that estrogen high from the granulosa cells makes this nice and penetrable from sperm. You mentioned, or at least on your homework assignment, many of you mentioned when her fertile period is. If sperm were to be introduced into the female, what days of that sperm introduction could she possibly have fertilization occur therefrom? What days of her reproductive cycle?
14, 15.
Nice job. Days 12 to 14. So a lot of people on the homework assignment, they were just putting, 3-day window of opportunity. Be specific, make sure you know what days that you're talking about. And then what was this general layer at the tip of the pointer? Endometrium. What hormone maintains the endometrium? Progesterone. What hormone rebuilds the endometrium? Estrogen. Looks good. Identify this specific structure here. Labia minora. Just deep to the labia minora would be erectile tissue that we call the bulb of the vestibule. And then she'll have a little gland that can produce a mucus-like secretion to lubricate this orifice. That gland would be the greater vestibular gland. She also has a paraurethral gland that does something similar. It's going to be just in here. We don't see it, but it's to lubricate this region. What is this entire region within the labia called? The vestibule. What is the entire external genitalia of the female called? The vulva. Vulva consists of everything, including that labia minora, labia majora. Just for good measure, the labia minora was homologous to what structure in the male?
Scrotum.
Corpus cavernosa.
The spongy urethra. So the erectile tissue would be the corpora cavernosa, but the labia minora, homologous to that penile urethra or cavernous urethra or spongy urethra. And of course the labia majora was homologous to the scrotum. Identify this specific structure here. This is actually called the glans clitoris. If you were thinking of the prepuce, that's going to be this skin that covers it right here. And it looks like, well, I thought this was the covering. Nope, the skin is over here. This is going to be the glans clitoris, and just deep to that is where you find the erectile tissue called corpora cavernosa clitoris, absolutely, and then it's anchored by the crura. Just for good measure, if we look back up here, we did all of those structures, but I didn't quite tag this one. What was this specific structure here? The round ligament. Identify the function of the round ligament. Anchors the uterus in an anterior antiflexed position. Here we see these structures called the scrotum or scrotal sac, either one is fine. This specific specific structure would be a testis. This structure is the
Epididymis.
epididymis. What were two main functions of the epididymis?
Reabsorb abnormal sperm.
Excellent. Maturation of sperm, reabsorption of abnormal sperm. Here we can see a spermatic cord. What were 5 main structures in that spermatic cord? I'll give you 2. Testicular artery, pampiniform plexus. What are 3 more? Vas deferens or ductus deferens, nice job. And the spermatic nerve, lymphatic vessels would have been great. Don't forget, there's also going to be, we can see a little bit here, but I think the other side showed it. This is this model's portrayal of this skeletal muscle structure called the cremaster muscle. The cremaster muscle elevates the testes in response to cold for what reason?
Spermatogenesis.
Yeah, it's not for protection in that case, it's for temperature regulation, for optimal spermatogenesis. The cremaster muscle also contracts to elevate the testes in response to sexual stimuli, and that is for protection. We know that this specific structure is called the glans penis. Homologous to what structure in the female? Glans clitoris. Again, much more sensitivity in the female though. We can also see, if we pull this apart, that the erectile tissue looks something kind of like this. What is this structure in white? Corpora cavernosa. Corpora cavernosa is going to engorge with blood with sympathetic or parasympathetic stimulation. Parasympathetic. As it engorges with blood, what's its action or what's its effect? Causes an erection. Versus corpus spongiosum engorges with blood to do what?
Keep the urethra open.
To keep that urethra open for ejaculation. So the urethra, of course, is right here. This specific passageway is the penile urethra, or you can call it cavernous urethra or spongy urethra. To clean it out prior to ejaculation, males have this structure called a vulvourethral gland that produces what type of secretion? An alkaline mucus type secretion to clean it out. Vulvourethral gland is homologous to what structure in the female? The greater vestibular gland. Nice job. This gland is called the prostate gland. 2 substances produced by the prostate gland include citric acid and
Alkaline rich mucus.
proteolytic enzymes to break down the clots, because you don't want a clot to stay in the female forever. The prostate gland is homologous to what structure in the female? Paraurethral glands, nice job. And then over here we can see this passageway coming from that spermatic cord, but coming up and over. Ooh, here's the enlargement. What is this enlargement and passageway called? Ampulla of the vas deferens. This is where the seminal vesicles produce their secretion. Name 5 substances produced by the seminal vesicles. Fructose, prostaglandins, clotting factors, bicarb or alkaline rich mucus, and it's not a whole lot of mucus, but I would accept that. Maybe I would ask for 4 substances produced here. All of those. Well, a student was asking a question. She said, when a male gets a vasectomy, will he still ejaculate? And you look over here to where that vasectomy occurs, and you think with a vasectomy, they're gonna cut part of that vas deferens. So in terms of what semen contains, from this area here, there's really only 2 parts of semen from this area here. What were the 2 parts of semen from the testis and epididymis? Sperm and
Vesicle fluid.
seminiferous tubule fluid. All of the other secretions come post vas deferens. So all that seminal vesicle secretion, he would still produce that after a vasectomy. All the prostate gland secretion, still produced after a vasectomy. And again, that vulvourethral gland, still there after a vasectomy. So when you're looking at these passageways, then pampiniform plexus, you should know 2 functions of it. What was it again?
Exchange temperature. Testosterone.
so you wanna understand how that works, you might have a question on that. And of course, to return or to allow that testosterone to go into that male body, so drain the testes of blood or testosterone-rich blood. What if I pointed here, identify the passageway? Vas deferens. Identify the region and structure at the tip of the pointer. Head of the epididymis. Identify the specific type of tissue that lines these passageways. Stereociliated columnar epithelial tissue. Nice job. Identify the specific type of tissue that lines this passageway. Stereociliated pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue. And then last but not least, identify the specific type of tissue that lines this passageway. Pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue. So I like to make it easy. I tend to think, oh, stereociliated, because they have the stereocilia to aid in the reabsorption. So stereociliated columnar epithelial tissue. Put columnar epithelial tissue for all of them. So stereociliated columnar epithelial tissue. Here, pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue. This is the longest passageway, so combine both of those together. Stereociliated pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue, and then you kind of get them down. Let's see if we can answer some other sample questions. Actually, we should look at some of these. What if you saw something like this in the field of view? Identify the specimen in the field of view. The penis. Identify the general structure at the tip of the pointer. Corpus spongiosum. And of course, the lumen is showing what passageway? The cavernous urethra or spongy urethra. Versus if you saw something like this, this is the corpus cavernosum or corpora cavernous. I would accept as well. Identify the specimen in the field of view. Testis or testes, the specific passageway is a seminiferous tubule. If you saw something like this, identify the organ in the field of view. Not the testes. This is your epididymis. Again, you're looking for that space, meaning that the sperm didn't form here, they're just being transported here. What if you saw something like this in the field of view? Identify the specimen. Spermatic cord, nice job. Pampiniform plexus, what's this structure? Testicular artery, nice job. Versus this would be the spermatic nerve. Don't forget your vas deferens, beautiful muscularis. Know all three layers, and especially the mucosa on the inside. I feel like we just reviewed this one, but for good measure, identify the region and organ in the field of view. Vortex of the ovary, identify the specific layer. Germinal epithelium, specific layer. Tunica albuginea. We know our primary follicle and primordial. We also saw that secondary follicle. Quite nice. If you saw something like this in the field of view, identify the organ. Ovary, but identify the specific structure. Corpus luteum. Don't forget this passageway is the uterine tube. Identify the function of the uterine tube. Sounds good. Transfers ovulated structure or fertilized structure to the uterus. Identify the organ, including the phase that it's in the field of view. Uterus, secretory phase. You know it's secretory because progesterone has made all of these structures called
Endometrial gland.
endometrial glands or uterine glands. They're found in what general layer and what specific layer? General layer endometrium, specific layer stratum functionalis. Don't forget the basalis and myometrium. We already went over a lactating, so active mammary gland versus, inactive. What was this specific structure again? Lobule with alveoli, what was this specific structure again? Lobule with alveoli, oh yes. If we were to zoom in on it, that's where we saw our myoepithelial cells and our secretory cells. Myoepithelial cells are stimulated by a secretion from the anterior or posterior pituitary gland.
Posterior.
Posterior pituitary gland, of course it was called oxytocin. This was the vagina, NKSSET. What was a ridge in the vagina called again?
Okay.
Rugae. What was its function?
Extension for birth.
Allows expansion. What if you saw something like this at a station, and I said identify the specific white structure? Oh, same thing we're just looking at, endometrial gland. This is that glycogen-rich gland of the endometrium. So this is that implanted structure. We can start to see two layers, pink and a yellow. What is this general structure called? Just the two layers? Bilaminar embryonic disc. You can see again from that epiblast, we're developing this blue cavity called a amniotic cavity or amnion for the membrane. From the yellow layer, we're developing this yellow cavity called a yolk sac. Over here, you can start to see these pink finger-like projections known as chorionic villi. They are starting formation of the placenta. We term formation of the placenta what? Placentation occurs during week 3. During that same time, we have gastrulation, which is the formation of
3 germ layers.
3 germ layers. Ectoderm faces the amniotic cavity, mesoderm in the middle, endoderm faces the yolk sac. What specific systems, name 2, develop from the ectoderm? Integumentary system, entire nervous system. In this little embryo, the big features that we start to see first are development of this pink organ and purple organ. What is that pink organ, you think? The heart, purple must be the liver. And then we can see this starting to develop. Right now, it kind of looks like an eye, but it's actually called the lens plateau. Nice job. You can start to see that umbilical cord starting to form. And of course, what do we call, these aren't actually arms and legs, we call them
Limb buds.
limb buds. All of this development is now within the amniotic cavity, so this specific membrane is called the
Amnion.
amnion. Again, your chorionic villi are getting a little more pronounced. Your yolk sac is getting smaller and smaller. You look over here and the chorionic villi really have segregated to just one side wherever implantation has occurred. So wherever that ball of cells first implanted, that's where we form this structure. This structure is called the
placenta.
placenta. So the placenta is part embryonic or fetal, the chorion, and part mom, the decidua basalis. So for some women, they'll have the implantation occur at the fundus or the body, and that's pretty normal. For some females, that implantation occurs near the isthmus to cover the cervix. If the placenta is forming and it covers that cervical canal, does anyone know what that's called or what's going to happen? She can't give vaginal birth, right? You've ruptured the placenta. We would call it, it's called placenta previa, and then placenta abruptio if it were to abrupt. The placenta, ideally, you want it up higher. If it's down here, of course, the baby would have to be delivered C-section wise. We have a lot of material on this exam, oh my goodness. But I want to take the last 5 minutes. Some of you know, some of you don't know. Questions before I do something really quick. So I always like to award students for their hard efforts during the semester. And I don't have a lot of time to reward you during the semester, and I know I only have 5 minutes right now, but I have something for your curve setters and others in this class. So I'm going to call you up to the front in a moment. Exciting. For folks that I think deserve some special recognition. So there's 9 awards in this class, but don't worry, nobody will walk away empty-handed. I want to call attention to a couple of students. I think there are only 2 in your class. Yes, 2 people in your class on each